I'm Michael Cockerell, and I've spent years unmasking our leaders, interviewing and profiling the great and the good, and sometimes the not so good, of British politics for BBC TV. I've made films about many prime ministers, and others who were the best prime ministers we never had. And here I'm looking back at my film, The Red Queen, about the passionate leading lady of the Labour Party, Barbara Castle. I've always been fascinated by Barbara Castle. One of my favourite political books opens, Barbara Castle was walking up and down Harold Wilson's room in number 10 Downing Street. She was bullying the Prime Minister, as usual. Making a film with Barbara Castle, I understood exactly what that meant. She would probably see it the other way round. She had been a journalist, and she really understood the media, completely opposite, say, from Ted Heath. And I remember once we were filming with her, and we were doing this interview, and about halfway through, she said, "Gosh, I'm on great form today. You're asking so many more questions than I thought you would, that I'm not going to say another word unless you agree to double my fee." So she negotiated her fee on air, and we agreed to double the fee. She was an extraordinary character.
In 1976, her old enemy Jim Callaghan narrowly beat her old friend Michael Foot for the premiership after Harold Wilson's sudden resignation. And one of the first things he did was to summon her to see him.
Door opened, the Prime Minister was waiting. And so he said, "I'm awfully sorry, Barbara, but I want somebody younger than you are." And I think each time we may wait for the young. And you know, I thought one of the most restrained things I ever did in my life was not to retort. Then why not start with yourself, Jim?
Barbara Castle was always difficult. She always had to do things in her own way, perfectly understandable, but sometimes they weren't the way that I wanted to get. So we were often at daggers drawn, but it seemed to work very well, because you really did get the passion and the poignancy there was in much of her life. We filmed one of Barbara Castle's garden parties, her annual garden party, where she would have MPs and journalists and others. And she had the deputy leader of the Labour Party, John Prescott, there. And we were filming, and we had a very good sound recordist who was able to pick up a lot of chat that John Prescott was having.
He's basically a decent guy. You're in with the chance if there's a go. Secondly, he also is quite prepared to admit he doesn't know something.
It was just after Tony Blair had been elected leader of the Labour Party, and John Prescott said to the other people around the table, "Well, of course, he got it too young. I mean, he's too young for the job. Too young for the job." But you know, he does realise when he makes a mistake, and that's a good thing. But the bit about him being too young for the job, somehow my editor got cold feet because the Sunday Times ran that bit, which had been in the advance copy that had been sent to the reviewers, and my editor, on the day of transmission, decided we cut the first bit of it out. I was very sad about that, but you've heard it now.
I didn't vote for him. I voted for John Prescott, because I think what you need in politics more than anything is a battling instinct. Now, has Tony got the killer instinct? I have, you know.
Barbara Castle made no secret of the fact that she had voted for Prescott against Tony Blair, but when Tony Blair won, she became very interested. She's always interested in how other successful politicians do things. And she'd never met Tony Blair, and we negotiated with Tony Blair and his famous spin doctor Alistair Campbell that when Tony was going to be at a Labour meeting, that he might have a few words with Barbara Castle. And in the film, it's the first time they ever met, and it's fascinating. And Tony is saying, you know, you're my hero. I've followed it, although he was completely the opposite of Barbara Castle.
And you haven't made yet, I'm watching you, mind you, any serious mistakes.
Right.
And it's very important that, you know.
And she seemed to be, for at least for that meeting, a Blairite. But some years later, as often happened in Barbara's life, a Labour leader let her down. Many people seem to let her down. And she said, and this is very interesting, she said, the thing about Tony Blair is he spends his whole time not concentrating on the bread and butter stuff in British politics. He just wants to be free to strut the globe. The problem with him is his own overinflated ego. And I thought, you're saying this without any self-irony. She was great to make a film about.
To further her understanding about sex, Barbara organised a meeting of the Oxford Labour Club in which she'd become a leading light. She invited the country's best-known sexologist, Norman Hare, to come and tell the club about human sexuality. Hare attracted the biggest crowd of the year, and the principal of her college, Miss Guire, summoned Barbara and demanded to know exactly what Hare had said.
Well, that made me more determined to lose my virginity than anything that anybody else could ever say to me.
Barbara Castle couldn't have been more of a contrast in terms of her private life and being prepared to talk about it compared to the blood out of a stone it was with Ted Heath. And she was extraordinarily candid about her love life. She gave us permission to go through all her papers, and we found that she had kept the love letters from the guy who was the first love of her life, a charismatic figure who was now forgotten, called William Mellor, no relation to David Mellor, who was a socialist journalist, very well-known socialist journalist who was about 15 years older than Barbara Castle.
That's a great love of my life. You can see how different he was from Rudolph Valentino, and how, in my views, he was a much more handsome man. Yet it wasn't a pretty face in the conventional way. It was strong-featured. Eyes that looked at you with honesty. And, of course, we were great lovers.
When we were making the film, how were we going to show these extraordinary, passionate love letters? And we thought it would be best to get someone to voice them. And who better could we think of than Glenda Jackson, who'd just become a left-wing Labour MP when she won Hampstead. We rang Glenda Jackson, and she said he would be happy to read Barbara's letters.
When William died on Monday, I hadn't seen or spoken to him for 5 days. When I saw him the previous Wednesday, I knew I was helpless to do anything for him. So I told him, I'm not coming to see you again until you are stronger. That's not because I don't want to, it's because I love you.
And we wondered who we should get to voice William Mellor's letters. And we thought of Nigel Davenport, who was the chairman of the Actors Union Equity and quite left-wing himself, and had a wonderful basso profundo voice.
My dear, last night was one of those many wonderful moments that live in my memory. After I left you, a warm glow took possession of me. It stays with me.
At one stage, she suggested to the Sunday Times that perhaps we'd broken into into her house to get these letters, which was completely nonsensical, because she'd said anything, you can go through anything, every papers, but I think she'd forgotten about the love letters. So we were very glad to delve them out with permission and use them in the film. Barbara Cossum thought there are different standards for women in politics, that women have to always look good. And she took great care of the clothes she wore on, and especially the hair. And she had a hairdresser in once a week to do it. And she also, if things had gone really wrong and she wasn't able to have her hair done, she had a wig, which she called Lucy. And she would go into the Commons, the ladies' loo. There weren't many ladies' loos in the Commons when she was first an MP, and would take so long putting on the makeup. They would call that loo that she occupied Barbara's castle. Many women on the left, but on the right as well, saw her as a kind of role model for what women could do in politics. There was a lot of talk that she might be the first woman prime minister. And interestingly, when Mrs. Thatcher won the Tory leadership election against Ted Heath, Barbara Castle wrote in her diary, she kept diaries, there was a thrill that she had won. Not that I agree with anything she said, but she was the only man among them. And she followed Mrs. Thatcher and understood what more was expected of a woman politician than of a man. I can remember one of the things that she got cross about. We'd filmed with when she'd gone to a Labour Party conference to get some footage of her, and we'd laid on a car to take her up to Blackpool, and we had the shot of her walking into the conference, and she was wearing a rather wonderful red jacket, and she said, and you used that shot, and you used the back shot, and you could see all the creases in my jacket, and we only had the creases in because I was sitting in that car that you sent me for 3 hours. You shouldn't have done that. Sorry, Barbara. There were sometimes quite pernickety things, but if it was ever to do with appearance, she would get very worried about that. Barbara Castle couldn't help flirting. She knew she was attractive, and I've seen sort of grown men just meeting the 80-year-old Barbara Castle, and they still sort of fell for her charms. But she could also turn it on the other way, and she could be a fishwife. She was a fascinating person to make a film about.